So the Senior Bowl is one of the most important scouting events of the NFL combine season, NFL draft season. And Jim Nagy has been the executive director of the Senior Bowl for a while now, and he is very active on social media. One of the things that he said this past week uh, was something very important to Georgia. And we've talked about this quite a bit on here about Georgia's offensive line. Cedric Van Pran is gone, but you're returning a lot of guys. Tate Ratledge, you've got Xavier Truss, Morris, Fairchild, Wilson, Green. I mean, there's a lot of guys that this group that Kirby and them have recruited, and it seems to me it's starting to pay off in terms of what Georgia's doing on the offensive line. And people are noticing. Not that Georgia's offensive line wasn't really good this past season, but here's what Jim Nagy had to say. Again, the director of the Senior Bowl. Here's what he had to say about Georgia's offensive line. He said, "The more I watch Georgia's tape, the more I think they're winning another national championship this year. It always starts up front, and they've got the best offensive line in college football." You can make the argument Georgia's had the best offensive line in college football for a while. They've not been recognized for doing such, but you could make the argument that they've been the best for some time now. Have have there been programs that are up there with them? For sure. Michigan, I think, has had a very good offensive line. Alabama has had a very good offensive line. But, this group with Truss and Morris and Tate and, they're going to have to – there's going to come a time when if Georgia's going to win a national championship, the offensive line is going to have to get it done. Now, let me go back in history and explain to you why I can say that. And here's what I mean. Against Alabama in 23, Georgia was not effectively running the football. It didn't happen. They ran enough, but it wasn't as effective as it needed to be. And when you're not running it and you're looking at 3rd and 6, I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen on 3rd and 6. Usually, that's a challenging down for the offense. I mean, any incomplete pass, you're off the field. A lot of completed passes, you're off the field. You can have interceptions. Stuff can happen. So you'd prefer 3rd and 3, 3rd and 2, 3rd and 1, 3rd and 4, but 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and beyond. I mean, that's challenging for an offense to convert against Alabama, and probably this season against Ohio State or Georgia. The offensive line for the Dogs in 22 against Missouri had to get it done. They had to. Stetson was not having a great night. It was fine. It wasn't great. And they weren't just mowing through Missouri. You had Kendall Milton breaking loose, getting a huge run, and then someone makes a play and he fumbles. Lose that momentum. The whole night, Georgia in 22 was just having a hard time, and they had to lean on their offensive line. They relied on Malachi Starks as well. He saved them, 4 points, which won them the game in chasing down a breakaway running back. But if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and you're Georgia, there's going to be a time when you need to lean on your offensive line. So that was in 22. In 21, you saw Alabama ran enough in the 2021 game. They were not a great run team. They ran enough in Atlanta that they could have Bryce Young throw it all over the place when they weren't running it. Georgia was not effective running the football in Atlanta. In Indianapolis, they were far more effective. And what happened was at the end of the game, the last 25 minutes, 20 minutes of the game, there were some substitutions made on that offensive line. James Cook and Zamir got going. And then, it was there. Everything sort of, I don't know that I would say it opened up. But remember, Georgia was losing in that game going into the fourth quarter. Now, they had momentum, but they were losing going into the fourth quarter. That's a challenging situation when you're not winning a game against Alabama and you're trying to come back to win. I mean, that's a tough one. But they did it. They got the job done. And they were down 7 in Atlanta at the half. But they didn't. They just they never could quite get where they needed to go running the ball in that situation. And against Bama in Indianapolis, they ran the ball effectively. It was exactly what they needed to have happen, and it did. I mean, they ran for 140 yards against Alabama that night. That's a lot against Alabama. I'm going to say you're not running for 200 yards against Alabama. And conversely, Alabama only had 30 yards total rushing against Georgia in that game. That was the problem for both teams. So that when Jim Nagy's talking about what it's like watching offensive lines, etc., it jumps out to you when, Georgia, I said they had the lead going in the fourth quarter. I misspoke. They were leading going into the fourth. They were not leading at the half, though. And they were only leading by 1 with 13 to go. So they were in a dogfight with Alabama and had to have a second half to come back to win that game. Alabama, let me get it straight. They were not winning. They were not losing going into the fourth, but they were losing 18-13 in the fourth. So 10 minutes to play in that football game, Georgia had to get the job done, and their offensive line had to do that with them. And when you go back and you look, at those last, like for instance, the game with the James Cook run, that changed that game. The game was completely in Alabama was totally in control until James Cook ripped off 67 yards. So they went 67 yards rushing, 4 yards from Stetson, 6 from Kenny, first down, and then Zamir plunges in for a touchdown. That changed that game. The whole game was changed at that moment. And that was because of what opened up in the offensive line. If Georgia's going to get where they got to go, they're going to have to score points. And they privately think they can score a lot of points, by the way. And that's because of the offensive line. Carson Beck's really good, by the way. That's not but in the world we live in, if you can protect the quarterback, you're going to score a pile of points. Ohio State in the game against Georgia, Kirby, if you read Double Dogs, which if you've not, that's on you, but I would pick up a copy today. We have a whole, extremely long chapter in there in the book about the Ohio State game. And Kirby is adamant to his defense during the game, we've got to get pressure on Stroud. Now, usually you want to get pressure. It's probably something that you don't have to say, but he was very adamant and clear with his guys. We got to get pressure on Stroud now, and they did. And the year before, I almost said Young a second ago, they got a ton of pressure. Excuse me, they got a ton of pressure on Young a year before that in Indianapolis. So I just, when you can lean on an offensive line to go get you 6 yards in the first 2 downs, okay, and you're looking at 3rd and 4 all night, that's totally. I mean, you're probably gonna win the game because it means you're controlling the line of scrimmage. Who has a defensive line that can really affect this offensive line? There will be teams. Texas this past season for sure. Will that be the case in 24? I don't know. Clemson in the national championship days? Yes. Well, Clemson in 1981 or 2 with Refrigerator Perry, right? Like there are teams and situations and times where your offensive line could have like Booger McFarland living in your backfield. All right, nobody wants that if you're an offensive line. There's ways to handle that. You can get the ball out of the perimeter real quick, or you can triple team guys or double. Nobody gets triple team. So there are situations where you can sort of handle that. But if your offensive line is dictating, then you're going to win the game. And if you're going to win a lot of games, then you get to the point that Jim Nagy's talking about. The more I look at Georgia's tape, the more I watch Georgia's tape, the more I think they're winning another national title this year. It always starts up front, and they've got the best offensive line in college football. That there are particular offensive lines I remember. A couple of them are back to back here. The Alabama 2020 offensive line was really good. The Georgia offensive line in 2021 was really good. I can't speak to Michigan this year. I know when Georgia played them in 21, they were the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line of the year in college football, and Georgia ate their lunch. So if you cannot do what you need to do on the offensive line, you will not win. Ohio State did a great job protecting, doing what they needed to do in 22 against Georgia and Atlanta. The problem was that in the momentum, Georgia stopped making mistakes, and the momentum got on top of Ohio State, and the defense just shut them down. We saw that with Oklahoma in their game against Georgia in the Rose Bowl. Your offensive line has got to be ready to come and play and party. And if they're not, you're going to have a long day. I don't know that I agree with Jim Nagy about, Georgia won a national championship this year, but he's completely correct. It always starts up front in college football. And if he's saying that they've got the best offensive line, I'm not going to argue with him. I want to just say real quick, you got to replace Cedric Van Pran. So Wilson's going to, that's going to be a challenge for him. But Fairchild, Tate Ratledge, Xavier Truss, they got Morris. There's guys. Ernest Green. There's guys. They've got plenty of guys. Amarius Mims leaving, that hurts. But Amarius didn't play half the season last year. So, you didn't have Brock. You didn't at the end of the season. You didn't have Brock really. You didn't have Amarius Mims. You didn't have there's a lot of guys you just didn't have, and that affects you over time. This offensive line, this should be one of the best in college football, perhaps the best. Tell me what you think down below. Thanks for watching.